When two Chinese ships collided while attempting to intimidate a much smaller vessel, it wasn't just an accident, it was an exposure. The incident reflected the same flaws that haunt China's infrastructure: outward strength masking inner weakness. The military, like its Tofu-dreg projects, is riddled with shortcuts and vulnerabilities. In the tense waters of the South China Sea, karma struck on August 11th. In a failed attempt to intimidate a lone Philippine Coast Guard ship near Scarborough Shoal, two Chinese vessels, a PLAN Type 052D destroyer and a China Coast Guard cutter, smashed into each other. The incident, caught on video by the Philippine crew of BRP Suluan, unfolded like a dark comedy. The destroyer cut sharply across the Suluan's path, only to be rammed by its own Coast Guard cutter, which couldn't stop in time. The cutter's bow was crumpled, the billion-dollar destroyer dented, and reports suggest casualties among Chinese crew. The Philippines offered medical help over radio. China stayed silent. Instead, the destroyer kept chasing the Suluan for another hour, while Beijing's propaganda machine denied the collision and blamed Manila. But with full video evidence released, the world saw the truth first. This humiliating self-collision not only fueled global ridicule, but highlighted a deeper problem. From faulty aircraft engines to warships that collide, China's military often reveals incompetence beneath its bravado. In fact, for decades, the Chinese military has been dogged by rumors and incidents exposing the real limits of its so-called military might, especially when it comes to equipment and heavy weaponry. So much so that Chinese arms exports have earned a reputation much like bargain shopping online, but with defects. Or as think tank RAND puts it, China attracts customers for its military equipment with cut-rate pricing and financing, but there are hidden costs, especially when gear malfunctions. Let's look at several examples recently. On May 19th this year, China unveiled the Zhutian SS-UAV-A, massive drone mothership with an 82-foot wingspan, able to carry 100 drones, or 2,200 pounds of missiles, at 9 miles up. But online, the debut was met with ridicule. Critics called it a gigantic missile magnet, a giant propaganda prop, and big, slow, and not stealthy. Easy prey in any contested airspace. One ex-user commented, "I'm sure Taiwan feels safe knowing China doesn't plan to use its military to attack other nations." Another added, "The self-governing free people of democratic Taiwan will be happy to hear that." Just weeks later, China touted another breakthrough. A geostationary satellite beaming data at 1 gigabits per second with a 2-watt laser, with a glamorous promise of outpacing Starlink's 100 to 250 megabits per second. Developed by Peking University and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, it uses advanced optics to steady laser signals through atmospheric turbulence. Impressive on paper, but unlike Starlink's dense network of 7,000-plus low-orbit satellites, this lone high-orbit bird is still vulnerable to scaling challenges. And, more importantly, bad weather. The announcement, like the Zhutian, was marketed as a leap forward, but many saw it as yet another flashy headline with more propaganda value than practical battlefield impact. Then, around a year earlier, during what was supposed to be a routine static fire test, a private Chinese rocket, the Tianlong-3, unexpectedly lifted off after its anchoring system failed. Instead of staying put, the touted Heavenly Dragon took an unscheduled 50th joyride before crashing into a hillside near the city of Gongye, erupting into a massive fireball. No injuries were reported, but the spectacle was caught on video and quickly went viral. The Tianlong-3 had been pitched as China's answer to SpaceX's Falcon 9, partially reusable and capable of hauling 17 tons to low Earth orbit. A person exclaimed, "How do you even manage to accidentally launch a rocket?" Another joked, "They really shouldn't put the launch rocket button right next to the test engine button." And if the collision between two Chinese vessels recently wasn't enough, there's another incident worth revisiting. In October 2023, British media, the Daily Mail, reported that a PLA Navy sub that finds a subway on 1341 was caught in its own trap of chain and anchor in the Yellow Sea, a device apparently meant to snare US or UK subs. The mishap allegedly killed all 55 crew members, after a systems failure contaminated the vessel's oxygen supply. China denied the story, and no footage has ever surfaced. But the reports pointed to serious communication gaps within the PLA and glaring technological shortcomings, most notably the absence of advanced safety systems standard in other navies. While the latest incidents are fresh, China's reputation for underwhelming military performance has persisted for decades. Let's look at some examples that a RAND study in 2023 highlighted. In Nigeria, the Air Force began receiving Chinese-made F-7 fighter jets in 2009, but the fleet was plagued with technical troubles. Several aircraft were lost to crashes or accidents, and by 2020, 7 of the 9 remaining had to be shipped back to China for extensive repairs. Myanmar's military junta discovered that the Chinese radar installed on its JF-17 fighters was highly inaccurate. The jets also lacked beyond visual range missile capability and airborne interception radar. Bangladesh too faced disappointment when its newly delivered Chinese-built Ka-W aircraft experienced ammunition firing failures almost immediately after entering service. Even Pakistan, China's biggest customer for military hardware, has voiced frustration. Its Chinese-made F-22P frigates suffered from various defects, including engine degradation and poor performance. The FM-90 missile systems on board had faulty infrared sensors, or IR-17, and SR-60 radars, leaving them unable to lock onto targets. In the end, the defective IR-17 units had to be scrapped entirely. And speaking of Pakistan, in May this year, China's much-ridiculed weapons stunned observers when Pakistani J-10C fighters, armed with PL-15 long-range missiles, shot down at least one of India's top-tier Rafale jets during the largest air battle in decades. But according to an August Reuters report, the success hinged less on the hardware's quality and more on India underestimating the PL-15's true range, over 200 kilometers, and Pakistan's use of a kill chain linking Chinese jets, Swedish surveillance aircraft, and ground sensors. So the failures are clear, but why do they keep happening? To answer that, we need to look at the causes. First, there's corruption in procurement. This isn't just petty bribery, it reaches the very top. In June 2024, The Guardian revealed that 2 former defense ministers, Wei Fenghe and Li Shangfu, were expelled from the Communist Party for serious violations involving bribery and favoritism. Wei, once head of the rocket force, and Li, sacked after only 7 months, are prime examples of how key positions are often awarded through political connections rather than competence. And this has real consequences. In January 2024, Bloomberg cited U.S. intelligence claiming that rocket fuel tanks had been filled with water, and that several missile silos in western China had non-functioning lids, failures tied directly to corruption within the rocket force. Then there's the state-owned defense industry. Dominated by monopoly enterprises, it faces almost no real competition, which means little incentive to innovate or fix problems quickly. Add layers of bureaucratic red tape, and you have defects lingering for years. Leadership appointments based on loyalty over skill only make it worse. One vivid example is China's massive shipbuilding sector, home to its aircraft carrier program. This year, the China State Shipbuilding Corporation and China Heavy Industry went through their second merger in just 6 years. Officially, it was to form the world's largest shipbuilder. Unofficially, it coincided with a wave of internal corruption scandals and political purges, raising doubts about whether the restructuring was about efficiency or simply clearing out rivals. Such shakeups often disrupt projects, bury technical issues, and replace seasoned engineers with politically favored appointees, further eroding quality and reliability. We also have the pressure to meet political goals. The so-called parade-ready mentality focuses on equipment that dazzles in national displays, even if it's unreliable in battle. Unrealistic deadlines set by the CCP to showcase strength often lead to rushed production and cut corners. Finally, we have the limits of reverse engineering, and here, history plays a role. China has a proud legacy of invention, yet in recent decades, it's gained a global reputation for prolific imitation, from handbags to entire European-style towns. This Shanzhai culture, once meaning pirate factories beyond the law, has gone mainstream, even in weapons manufacturing. Many of China's most advanced military systems their striking resemblance to US and Russian designs. For years, American officials have been saying that hackers have stolen classified data on aircraft like the F-35 and X-47B. Russia learned the hard way after selling Su-27 fighters, only for China to debut the nearly identical Shenyang J-11B. The problem is that a copied shape doesn't guarantee copied performance. Like a counterfeit luxury bag with a faulty zipper, these weapons may look the part but remain untested in combat, leaving allies and rivals alike questioning whether they'll work when it truly matters. As naval analyst Eric Werfheim notes, "I think the big issue with all Chinese weapons, including copies of Western equipment, is that they remain untested in combat. We just don't know how they will perform." While they may be far less expensive than their Western counterparts, many countries are understandably reluctant to take the risk of acquiring products that haven't passed the ultimate test of combat. Not only does China face problems with its weapons, but the way it trains and conditions its troops has also come under scrutiny. Consider the most recent embarrassment: 2 Chinese vessels colliding with each other while harassing Filipino ships. Analysts argue this wasn't simply bad luck. It reflects how the CCP has shaped its forces through years of rewarding recklessness. Ray Powell, director of Sealight at Stanford's Gordian Knot Center, told CNN that such incidents are not accidental. He pointed out that Beijing has long celebrated aggressive behavior, recalling as far back as 2001, when a Chinese pilot who died in a collision with a U.S. reconnaissance plane was honored as a national hero. In his words, the incentive structure for military officers seems to bend toward aggression. He also suggested that such culture of glorifying escalation may explain why an overzealous Chinese captain would take unnecessary risks, hoping to earn recognition from above. Almost exactly a year earlier, on June 20, 2024, the world witnessed a shocking escalation near the Second Thomas Shoal. The Philippine government accused China's Coast Guard of a brutal assault, wielding axes and knives to slash Filipino rubber boats and even stealing equipment. One Filipino serviceman lost his thumb after a Chinese vessel rammed into his boat. Footage released by the Philippine military showed Chinese personnel looting rifles, destroying communications gear, and puncturing vessels. Acts so brazen that General Romeo Bronner Jr., Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, condemned them outright. "Only pirates do this. Only pirates board, steal, and destroy ships, equipment, and belongings." But does this kind of training and indoctrination truly produce the hardened, disciplined warriors Beijing intends? Something akin to the fearsome Mongol tribes that once terrorized China. If anything, the recent collision suggests the opposite. Heated rhetoric and a culture of aggression have instead fostered overzealous and miscalculated actions. And as observers have noted, had fate not intervened with a self-inflicted black eye, but instead allowed China to succeed in its reckless gambit, the result could easily have provoked a U.S. response under its treaty obligations to the Philippines, risking nothing less than a slide toward World War III. Even if Chinese engineers struggle with homegrown innovation, should the world really lower its guard against Chinese power? Not quite. The Chinese Communist Party has mastered a skill that every world power underestimates at its own peril: espionage and theft. Copying alone may not give Beijing the ability to perfectly replicate cutting-edge U.S. systems, but espionage often bridges that gap. Just this March, the Department of Justice announced the arrest of 2 active-duty U.S. Army soldiers and a former soldier for allegedly selling secrets to buyers in China. One of them, Sergeant Jian Zhao, was accused of selling nearly 24 classified hard drives, some marked secret and top secret, along with sensitive documents about HIMARS rocket systems and U.S. readiness in a potential conflict with China. He reportedly received at least $15,000 for the information. Another soldier, Li Tian, along with former serviceman Ruoyu Duan, was charged with conspiring to steal and pass on U.S. Army operational data and weapons manuals, including information about Bradley and Stryker fighting vehicles. According to prosecutors, the trio worked with at least one contact in Changchun, China, to funnel classified material out of the U.S. military. As Attorney General Pam Bondi put it, these men actively work to weaken America's defense capabilities and empower our adversaries in China. And this isn't an isolated case. In just the past 2 years, U.S. prosecutors have charged multiple service members with leaking sensitive information to Chinese buyers. From radar blueprints in Japan to manuals on America's most advanced weapons. Chinese spying is problematic enough that even its ally Russia has had to cast doubts. In June this year, a leaked report from the Federal Security Service, FSB, of the Russian Federation reveals Moscow secretly labels China an enemy, despite the public no-limits partnership. The document, which was verified by Western intelligence, warns Beijing is recruiting Russian insiders, stealing military know-how from the Ukraine war, and eyeing the resource-rich Far East under the guise of business and research. If even Russia feels the need to guard itself from its closest partner, the rest of the world cannot afford complacency. Another reason China should not be underestimated is its quiet use of the war in Ukraine as a training ground. Recent revelations from Kyiv suggest that Moscow has been preparing to work with Beijing in training Chinese personnel to counter NATO weapon systems, effectively granting the plie valuable real-world insights into modern warfare. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, HUR, told the Kyiv Post in June that such decisions by Moscow and Beijing clearly illustrate the Russian regime's intention to align with China in a course of global confrontation with the West. Beyond these operational maneuvers, what often draws equal attention is how the Chinese Communist Party reacts when setbacks or embarrassments occur. And this often makes the world roll its eyes. Usually it's the same tactic: deny, exaggerate, or claim victory, even as everyone knows the truth is the opposite. A recent example came just on June 13th, when China's Ministry of National Defense declared it had warned and expelled the USS Higgins, a Burke-class guided missile destroyer, from waters near Scarborough Shoal. Soon enough, the U.S. 7th Fleet dismissed the statement outright, calling it false, and clarifying that the Higgins was carrying out a lawful freedom of navigation mission and would not be intimidated. Beijing employs this strategy for a reason. No matter how undeniable the facts, or how strong the public backlash, there will always be a fraction of people inclined to believe otherwise. This is especially true within China, where nationalism often blurs into unquestioning acceptance of the CCP's narrative. The risk, however, is that propaganda can feed back into reality. As one observer noted on social media, nobody chases the U.S. Navy away from anything. China had better knock this off, because one of their captains may start believing their own propaganda and actually attack a U.S. warship in the South China Sea. And China will like the response it gets. In the end, China's military often resembles its infamous Tofu-dreg projects, impressive in appearance, but riddled with flaws beneath the surface. From reckless training and propaganda to shaky alliances and self-inflicted mishaps, the cracks are plain to see. And like those crumbling buildings, a force built on such foundations is hardly one to be proud of, because when reality strikes, it may collapse under its own weight.